Many people feel divorce is a death sentence, but with the right support and guidance, you can move through the process with knowledge, skills, and confidence. It can also be a time of growth and progress. As a divorce and empowerment coach, I'm an invaluable member of your divorce team. I help you understand and navigate the process, come to terms with your emotions, avoid costly mistakes, learn skills to help you communicate and negotiate, find your true voice, and create an empowered life post-divorce. If you're interested in learning more, schedule a free consultation at herempowereddivorce.com. Hi, beautiful. I'm so excited about our episode today. I have a fabulous expert to share with you. She's going to share her advice on how to help you on your divorce journey. I get asked so many questions about divorce, and many of them are legal. Hi, Christina. Thank you so much for being my guest today. It's so good to have you here.
Hi, Beverly. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So the first thought that comes to my mind is, what are the processes that are available to handle a divorce case?
So I would say the three main options, and I'll go through each of them in detail. The first is litigation. The second is mediation. And the third is collaborative. So the first is, like I said, it's litigation. And that is when usually one or both sides have their own attorney and the case is before a judge. Documents are requested formally. Parties usually are not speaking to each other very often. Their attorneys are speaking on their behalf. And if a decision cannot be made in the case, if there's not a settlement, issues throughout the case, and then ultimately the decision at the end of the case regarding custody, finances, property division goes to a trial before a judge.
Okay.
Now, I will say about litigation, sometimes it has a bad reputation, and it doesn't mean that you can't settle at any point throughout the process. And actually with divorce cases, very frequently, I mean, it's fairly rare that a divorce case actually goes to a full trial, but there may be hearings along the way and interim things that need to be dealt with. But really, at any point in the case, when the parties have enough information and are ready to do so, they can settle their matter. But if they can't, or if there are issues that they just cannot resolve, a judge will make the decision. So that's litigation. The second is mediation. Mediation is when parties go before they select a neutral person, typically an attorney. Isn't always an attorney, but actually I recommend that the mediator be a family law attorney in a family law case. And the parties attempt to reach agreement. The neutral mediator facilitates the ability of the agreements to make a party. The mediator really isn't representing one side or the other. Sometimes the people who are the parties who are in the mediation will each have their own consulting attorneys to speak with about how the mediation process is going, questions about, is this fair? Is this not fair? Does this seem right? Are we on the right track? Do you have any suggestions for things? It's not necessary, but it's usually recommended. And then the third process is collaborative law, the collaborative process, which has really gained more traction in recent years. It's more popular in some parts of the country than others. A collaborative law process involves a team of professionals. Each party has their own lawyer, must have their own lawyer in a collaborative law process. And then oftentimes there are usually either one or two financial professionals. Sometimes in some places there are two financial professionals, one for each party. Sometimes there's one neutral one that kind of helps, with the financial issues and for education. And there are often mental health professionals involved too, either a neutral or two. They're called coaches frequently in the collaborative context to kind of address dynamics that may come up, in divorce cases. And the goal of the collaborative process is to resolve the case amicably. And sort of within this team, it's kind of this insular universe where the issues that come up in a case, you can have a professional that's there, that's part of the team to help deal with it. The critical distinction in a collaborative matter, distinguished from mediation, is that in a collaborative law matter, the attorneys will actually sign what's called a disqualification agreement at the beginning of the case, saying if the collaborative law process fails, the attorney cannot then represent the client in court in a litigation. And the reason is it is to incentivize the lawyers, to want to keep the process amicable, to try to work towards settlement. And if the process does fail, and if it does become a litigated case, the parties will need to get other attorneys to represent them. So there's a fourth process that I don't see too often in my world, but if parties can sort of come to an agreement themselves, at the dinner table, and come up with what they want to do, and really just, involve a mediator or attorneys to just draft the paperwork. It can happen, but I don't see it too frequently. And I think sometimes if there are assets involved and if there are children involved, and it sometimes the more complicated the case is, the more, it's usually pretty typical to see one of these other processes used.
Yeah, I typically see it among young people with no children and no assets.
Right. Whereas maybe it's a short-term marriage. You keep what you have, I keep what I have. We're just going to draft the paperwork. No spousal support, obviously no child support, and those cases exist, of course. But it's
and that's called pro se.
So depending on your jurisdiction, yes, pro se or pro per. Yeah, those are the two ways of calling a self-representative.
What was that second one you said?
Pro per.
Pro, what was that?
Per, P-E-R. Yeah, pro per. That's what we call it in California.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So if you'd like, it may be helpful for your listeners for me to kind of talk through the pros and the cons of each approach. Beautiful. If you think that would be helpful.
Let's do it.
Great. Very. Okay. So litigation, as I mentioned before, it kind of has a, bad reputation, but is I'll start with the pros. Litigation is good when one or both parties are simply not cooperative. And sometimes you'll have a case where somebody doesn't want to move the matter forward, won't engage in the process, or on the other end of the spectrum, super hostile, uncooperative, is not interested in resolving anything. And with that dynamic, it's impossible to settle a case. Sometimes one party will start off like that in the litigation process, and then sort of as the process goes along, they see that it's, a difficult way to engage. It's an expensive way to proceed. And so it's not to say that a case can't be settled when that dynamic exists, but, litigation exists and the courts exists when a decision has to be made and the parties are unable, because one or both of them just cannot make a decision on financial issues, so property division or support, which, alimony or spousal support, spousal maintenance, some jurisdictions call it, and child support or child custody issues, basically all of the issues that arise in a divorce. So, another example is when there's abuse, of course. I'll talk a little bit about some of the other processes are not appropriate in cases where there has been, emotional or physical abuse. Sometimes restraining orders are necessary. So the courts exist for a reason, and that is a pro. You will have a decision made by a judge in your case. The cons. It is typically an expensive process. It is a process that can often be acrimonious, contentious, and it makes things difficult in terms of, for family. It often can make things difficult in terms of family moving on in a new dynamic, right? Because a divorce doesn't end the family; it just recreates what the going forward dynamic is going to be, especially if there are children.
Scars are left. Yeah.
Correct. That's right. And so, the other part of litigation is judges have a lot of cases before them. I think almost every court in this country, especially in major metropolitan areas like LA and New York. I mean, the courts are overloaded. And so, judges, they do their best, of course, but, you're having a stranger make a decision about your lives, about very important parts of your life that, if possible, if you are able to reach a resolution, a settlement, whether that's in a litigation process after a certain period of time, or in one of these other processes, I think everyone can agree if it's possible, if it's possible and if it's fair. Although divorce lawyers, sometimes we refer to fair as the F word, but if it's possible, a settlement.
Yeah, I think that's a misunderstanding. Yeah, I think that's a misunderstanding. Just like my mother used to say when I was little, life isn't fair. Well,
right. I mean, it's a difficult
divorce
process.
isn't always fair.
That's right. That's definitely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are the pros and cons of the litigation process. The pros and cons of the mediation process. So this is again where you have a third party neutral, a mediator that helps to facilitate discussions and ultimately, hopefully, an agreement about all the issues in your case. So pros are, it is a process that is totally voluntary. So both parties want to be there, presumably. Both parties, want to reach a resolution. Both parties want to engage in the process, and sometimes you can come up with more creative solutions in a settlement or in a mediation or in a collaborative process than would otherwise arise if your case were tried. I mean, there may be only a few options that a judge has in order to deal with a variety of issues, where in a settled case, in a mediation, for example, you have sort of the time and the flexibility to come up, to explore options that may work best for you and your family. So I think, in terms of the scars, like I said, it's a less contentious. Ideally, it's not to say that every mediation is kumbaya, because that's certainly not the case. I mean, there's conflict and there are issues, difficult issues that need to be worked out. But the idea is that both parties, because it's voluntary, want to at least attempt to come to a resolution, to see if they can come to a resolution. Typically is a less expensive process. You haven't hired, if you're in a mediation, usually you haven't hired lawyers to communicate on your behalf, right? Exclusively, you and your spouse will be in the same room with the mediator. Consulting attorneys may or may not be present. They may be there, or it may be a situation where you speak to your consulting attorney afterward or beforehand about things to prepare for or things that have happened in the mediation. So those are the pros of a mediated approach. The cons, I would say the main con, and this is sort of what I touched on before, some cases are just not suited for it. I think sometimes a party will think, well, if I can mediate the case, it will be a quick resolution where I don't have to provide documents to the other side, for example, right? So that's some, or I provide limited documents. I provide the bare minimum of what I have to have, beyond the mandated, state, disclosure form. And beyond that, we'll just reach a quick deal. Maybe a spouse that's more used to sort of running the show. For mediation to work, there needs to be full transparency and, free exchange of documents. Of course, it's up to the parties what they want to exchange beyond, of course, the required disclosures. But yeah, the cases where someone's trying to sort of pull a fast one on the other one, not good for mediation. Though consulting attorneys can help, though, in that case, to at least, to advise the client, hey, look, you're entitled, and I am advising and recommending that you look at XYZ and have a financial expert, like an accountant, look at XYZ before you do a deal on this issue. Situations where there's been abuse, of course, those cases are not generally appropriate for mediation. And, situations where sometimes you just have a party who, like I said, doesn't want to engage in the process, doesn't want to cooperate, either has their head in the sand or are, kind of burying their head in the sand, or are hostile, and just those cases are not well suited. But I think mediation is a great option for a lot of families. So that's that. The collaborative law. So The pros of collaborative law is that you are putting together a team of professionals, like I said before, and they're experts who are trained to really deal with all the different dynamics and issues that come up in a divorce. And the other thing is you can kind of pick and choose additional experts in addition to attorneys, financial professionals, and a coach. You can, if there's a specific, if there's, for example, special needs child or, involved, like you can have a child specialist, you can involve people with the specific expertise needed. I've seen collaborative cases where, okay, a house may need to be sold or refinanced. They'll bring in a real estate, broker, somebody that's experienced, a mortgage lender, things like that to kind of advise.
Gotcha.
Again, voluntary process, total transparency. Everybody is pretty much, because what happens within the collaborative, in order to facilitate that transparency and that really working collaborative environment, they want to, it's a confidential environment where that, information exchange. Mediation is that way too, at least in California. So check your jurisdiction. I should say the advice I'm giving is, it's not specific to any state. You should always, in any divorce, you're going to have to consult with a lawyer in your own jurisdiction because, rules in every state are different. But at least in California, mediations and things that happen in the course of a mediation are typically confidential.
Many people feel divorce is a death sentence, but with the right support and guidance, you can move through the process with knowledge, skills, and confidence. It can also be a time of growth and progress. As a divorce and empowerment coach for over 25 years, I'm an invaluable member of your divorce team. I help you understand and navigate the process, come to terms with your emotions, avoid costly mistakes, learn skills to help you negotiate, find your true voice, and create an empowered life post-divorce. If you're intrigued and want to learn more, schedule a free consultation with me at herempowereddivorce.com. And now let's get back to the show. If there is a disqualification and they need to get a new attorney and collaborative to go to court, then you've got the new retainer, the new fees all over again. Right.
And I think practitioners, people do love collaborative for the right cases because I think it's a commitment. I mean, it's a process. It's a commitment where everybody's sort of on the same team saying we are really everybody's trying to commit to resolve this. Whereas mediation, sometimes, it preserves options for sure. In other words, it's more flexible in that regard. But, somebody could end the mediation after like one or two sessions, say, there's a blow up. I don't want to do this anymore. Let's go to court. Whereas collaborative, I think because of those sort of consequences, so to speak, it may be that folks they understand the process up front and understand they really want to try to make that process work where possible because of the, for lack of a better word, consequences, if it doesn't, just in terms of starting over.
Sometimes women come to me complaining about the cost of divorce. And one of the things that I know affects it drastically is how long the process takes.
Definitely.
And sometimes you see one of the spouses dragging it out and not turning over documents and really continuing to do things that make the length of time so long. Are attorneys aware of that? And is there anything that can be done to manage that time?
Attorneys are definitely aware of it. And at least in the I practice in California, there are absolutely consequences for, spouses who do not turn over financial information. It involves filing motions with the court, which is an expense. Right. But at least in California, if you have to file a motion for the court to obtain documents that you're clearly entitled to, you can potentially seek sanctions, which is a financial penalty on the other party for the failure to turn over what's clearly, you're entitled to. So Yes, it can take time. I mean, it's kind of the nature of the court system. And yes, there is, an expense associated with filing motions. But the courts, there are remedies to deal with that. And, I would say for women who are involved, let's say in a mediation and, a couple of sessions and they're not getting the documents, for example, that they're asking for, or they get and they're told the mediator, hey, okay, like we need to get these documents. And if a party's not cooperating, then it's probably time to end that process. Because like I said, these amicable sort of settlement focused processes are not right for every case. And there are those cases where somebody's going to be, not turn over things. The other option in a litigated case is to subpoena documents. And it's something I do all the time, right? So if, you want bank statements, you want credit card statements, you want these all this stuff that, say it's an account you don't have access to. There are subpoenas that exist, you subpoena the bank and you will get those documents. It just sometimes takes a little bit of time.
Oh, that was perfect. Yeah, I was very interested in that. I'm so glad you mentioned domestic violence. That is really a hot button of mine. I'm a survivor myself. So one of the things I tell potential clients is typically call the divorce coach first on your team and they will help you build out the rest. But in the case of domestic violence, that's absolutely not the way to go. The first person you call is an attorney.
Absolutely.
You've got safety issues, or the first person you call is the domestic violence shelter or the domestic violence hotline, and then the attorney. Because some of the latest statistics I've seen are that 70% of women that leave an abusive marriage are murdered.
Oh
and so they definitely need to have that experience support, not just a friend, not a mother, not somebody that experienced something different in a different state, but they need experts telling them how to do it. So one of the things I recommend is in certain cases, you need a very specific attorney. You need somebody that has experience in domestic violence, or you need an attorney that has experience dealing with a narcissistic spouse, or you need an attorney that's specifically dealing with fraudulent financials. How does somebody find that niche? Because you can look up family law attorneys, you can look up attorneys, but my recommendation to them is get somebody that's done this before, not just somebody in general. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I absolutely echo what you're saying. I mean, absolutely. You, of course, want your support network in place, but absolutely. The first stop needs to be an attorney, because domestic violence cases, especially, at the outset, they move very quickly. If there's a need for a emergency temporary restraining order in place, they're fast paced, and you definitely want somebody who is experienced and who has done it before. So, for example, like a mediator, we'll talk a little bit later about sort of how to best select a lawyer. Although maybe we can just, we can talk about it now, because it sort of segues
right into it.
Yeah, you want an attorney. I mean, you want to think about the kind of process and the kind of case, how you are going to, how you want your case to proceed. If you need emergency relief, whether it's a restraining order against a person, whether it's a property type of restraining order because assets are disappearing, whether you need emergency custody relief, things like that, where it's going to be immediately you need to file and start off the case in a certain way. Right? Versus, okay, you know what? My spouse and I, yes, there are issues, but I think we want to try to save costs. We can be in the same room together. Okay, you want to pick an attorney who is an experienced mediator, just like you want an experienced litigator for certain type of cases, and specifically a family law litigator, not necessarily a generalist, but somebody who knows family law. Similarly with a mediator, you want to pick somebody who has experience with all the different dynamics, because that arise in a divorce case. While no two divorce cases are the same, of course, there are similar dynamics that, arise in each case. So you want a practitioner that is experienced in the type of issues that you think are going to come up in your case. So I totally echo that. I mean, I think.
And how do you find them? How do
You find
them?
it, yes. I was going to say, so I mean, I think my opinion is, I mean, sort of the best way initially is, I think, word of mouth. I mean, is a referral.
Okay.
So I mean, I think if you know, friends who have gone, friends, family members, any women's support groups, whoever, who have gone through a divorce, I think that the best place to start is to ask them. Second to that, I mean, a lot of times on state bar websites, you can identify, attorneys, at least in California, you can identify their practice areas. That's another good place to start. To see, okay, is this, somebody who specializes in family law? You can kind of look at their, I mean, I think a lot of, for example, folks that only mediate, as an example, are generally going to say that on their website, right? I mean, it's clear, like once you start getting names, and again, I think, referral, word of mouth, that kind of stuff, or even if the client knows, the potential client knows a lawyer, for example, that could be in a different field, they can ask that, sometimes people have a trust and estates attorney, or even like, if you have a good relationship with your accountant, or a therapist, it's not just friends and family, any kind of trusted advisor, I would say, you can ask them, hey, do you know any family law attorneys you can recommend? I think that's a great starting point. And I always think it's good. I was going to say, I think it's also good for potential clients to interview more than one attorney. Doesn't have to be 20 people, but I think speaking with 2 or 3 people or more if they want, but to sort of get a sense of the personality. Is this going to be a good fit? It's a way of getting knowledge too, so I think that's important too. And early in the process, that's another thing.
You mentioned the Bar Association earlier. There's a lot of information available there where you might be able to get lists of attorneys. Let's say you're new to the town and you know nobody. Mm-hmm. But is it appropriate then to just call the law firm before even paying for that consultation and say, does this attorney have experience in blah, 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 blah? Will that be something that you can find out without having to pay for a consult?
I think, so usually like a website will be an attorney's website, and most attorneys in this day and age have a website, I think is a great place to start. Attorneys in my experience, most attorneys have a lot of information on websites as to, you can see what their background is, where they went to school, what their specialties are, how long they've been doing it, and the kinds of matters that they handle. I heard recently somebody say, the website is almost the new business card these days, where that's kind of the first stop for information. So I think that's a great place to start, because if you get a name and you're looking at the website and let's say it's more personal injury, right? And maybe as an example, right? You can see, all right, they don't do what I do, I'll do what I want. So yeah, I think that's a good place to start. You can certainly, there's no harm in calling the office, and usually an office, if they have somebody that picks up the phone, and you can, some offices will, have sort of an intake person, right? Before you even get on the phone with an attorney, we'll have an intake process, ask a few questions about the matter, and just very basic things to do a conflict check, and B, see if the matter would be an appropriate fit for the firm or for the attorney before the consultation.
You had mentioned earlier that in litigation, a judge decides, and we talked about this concept of fairness, right? One of the things I encourage all my clients to do is to be informed and to be an advocate for themselves, not to throw their hands up and say, oh, this is too complicated, my attorney's just going to handle it all. Because that way, then somebody else is making your decisions, and 5 years down the road, you could look back and go, gosh, I didn't want it to end this way at all. What are your thoughts on that subject?
Yes, I mean, this is definitely a realm where knowledge is power. You want to be informed. I mean, of course, you rely on your attorney. Your attorney is your trusted advisor. Your attorney will help you. But I think the client is also, it's critical for the client to understand, you know, what's going on in your case, right? Like what's going on in your case? Like, what are your rights? What are your obligations? If there's settlement being reached, what are the details of, of course, the attorney can't settle the case without the client's, permission and consent, but really read the settlement document, understand, ask questions. I think critically, really at the beginning of the case, and even before maybe someone's thinking about divorce, they're not sure, but they want to start. I encourage clients, get educated, meet with an attorney, pay for that consultation for an hour or whatever to understand what the process is in your jurisdiction, what your rights are, what your obligations are, so that you know what to expect. I mean, I think a few other, especially if there's if a spouse potentially has not worked outside of the house, isn't, for in a long time, isn't financially sophisticated, their partner, their spouse kind of handles all the bills, handles all the finances, makes the money. I think it's really important because at the beginning of every case, I mean, in most jurisdictions that I know, there's this disclosure schedule, a financial disclosure that gets exchanged, that has assets, debts, income, expenses. And so I think it's just even to get in a place where you start thinking about, okay, what is my post-divorce life gonna look like in terms of assets, spending? It's important, I think, as early as possible to get a handle on, and if it, on financial issues. So for example, one thing somebody could, you could, if you're filing joint tax returns, which a lot of married couples do, get the last 3 to 5 years of tax returns, look those over. Understand them, understand what the, any accounts and assets that are on there, things, see how much money is coming in, things like that. Joint bank account statements, joint credit cards, and also just, those type of documents are important, I think, just to have a sense of what's going on. And your own spending too. Some spouses, they have been reliant on the other spouse to kind of handle all money matters. So they may not know how much their mortgage is, or their rent, how much the property taxes are, how much they spend on clothing, grocery store, things like that. And all those figures are going to be relevant in the divorce case.
Yeah, I think I had a client who was separated. And the husband had an IRA and he cashed that in and didn't report it in the settlement process. And so she became liable for 50% of the tax impact of that issue. And so now she's trying to go to court to say, I didn't know about it. I think it's called an innocent spouse claim.
Yeah, I mean, so innocence. Yeah, I mean, there are ways of dealing with that in the court system. In California, it would be, an omitted asset is what it's called. So a spouse didn't disclose something, and there's remedies for that. But it's, of course, but it's a pain to have to fix that stuff on the back end, and you can't always control it. I mean, if somebody's lying and hiding things, you have to, of course, do your diligence, and your attorney needs to do the diligence during the case to make sure everything is known. But yeah, the more you know, the better. I think, because it would be,
and you shouldn't be afraid to say, I don't know.
Absolutely.
I think that there are some certified divorce financial analysts, maybe certain accountants, or even YouTube and other sources that can give you a very basic education in financial terminology. Women were typically kind of raised that we're bad in math, that the guy is good in math. And so we need to kind of conquer that way of thinking, because this is an area and I try and talk with my clients about, it isn't just about winning this pot of money, right? You have to think about this is the entire rest of your life.
That's right.
It's a lot bigger deal than just winning. It's sound planning so that you will, have funds for the rest of your life.
That's right. Absolutely. And
So,
some cases it really makes sense, to involve maybe not a forensic accountant. That may not be needed in every case, but to involve potentially a financial advisor on your side. And there are lots of
yes.
CDFA, which are, certified divorce financial analysts, and they can assist at generally a cheaper hourly rate than an attorney in sort of helping somebody project out, okay, in terms of, all right, for spousal support, for example, like, and the assets that somebody's getting and the income that can be thrown off from those assets, like how much do I need, for my life? Is what I'm getting enough? Do I need to go back to work? Is there a short, there are lots of questions. I mean, another area I see that being very helpful in is deciding what to do with the house. In a lot of cases that if they, parties own a house, that's a major asset, it's the biggest asset in the case. So the question becomes, okay, does the wife want to stay in the house? Is that an option? Is that something, that can she afford to do it with the support and other assets and potential income from those assets she's going to get? Does it make sense if there's a high housing costs every month, like with the property taxes and mortgage? Does it make sense, even if you can afford it, to be spending, most of your monthly income on the house? So those kind of issues, super important to address. In the case and understand it. So yeah, absolutely. It's don't be afraid to say, I don't know, I don't understand. Can you explain it again? Because divorce lawyers, family law attorneys, we do this stuff all the time, and so it's sometimes people can speak fast and kind of assume that everybody understands, and it's very important to ask as many times as you need to understand the process and any questions about any of it.
Christina, this has been so fabulous. I could go on and on asking you questions, but I ask each of my guests for 3 actionable takeaways for the audience. What do you suggest?
Okay, so two of them, I would say, get organized, get educated, and if necessary, if it's appropriate, talk to a therapist or a divorce coach. Right. So, I've kind of talked about get educated and get organized. I mean, that when I'm really, when I'm talking about talking to a lawyer early in the process, understanding the finances, organizing the documents. I mean, this is a minor thing, but actually it can be cost saving. So I'll note it. When you give documents to your attorney, if you can organize them up front or get somebody to help you organize them up front and present them to your lawyer in that way, it saves money and time. So even if you need to get somebody to help you do that, it probably has a lesser rate than the attorney, or maybe the attorney's paralegal, that's good. So my last actionable takeaway, in terms of if it's a divorce is challenging for everybody, and it's, really there are very rare cases that are just totally amicable, where everyone's just 100% ready to just immediately move on. So I think getting a therapist or working with a divorce coach is great. I mean, it's important for people, I think, because there's so many emotions that come up in the process and, dynamics and things like that, a divorce lawyer, while of course we are experienced in, of course, being a sounding board and talking to folks, we're not mental health professionals, and so I think that it makes sense to be able to have an outlet outside of your attorney, maybe outside of your friends and family, sort of a dedicated person that you can talk to about all the things that you're going through that can help you sort of realize, and I do tell this to my clients, like there is another side. You will come out the other end of this. Like there is an ending to this process. You will be happier, and this process won't last forever. So those would be my 3.
That's important. Thank you so much for being my guest today. This has been so information-packed, and I know it's going to be so helpful to the audience. Thank you, Christina.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you to our listeners for being with Christina and myself on this episode of Her Empowered Divorce. All of Christina's information will be available in the show notes along with mine. You can find them at herempowereddivorce.com on the podcast page or wherever you listen to podcasts and YouTube. If you'd like one-on-one support for your divorce process, sign up for a free consultation with me at herempowereddivorce.com. And join me for our next episode where I'll be diving deeper into what other expert professionals can share to help you on your separation and divorce journey. Remember that you can find more episodes, back episodes, and information at herempowereddivorce.com. Thank you so much and take care. Thank you for listening to the Her Empowered Divorce podcast. Remember, divorce doesn't have to be a death sentence. With the right support and guidance, you can move through the process with knowledge, skills, and confidence. And it can also be a time of growth and empowerment. A divorce and empowerment coach is an invaluable member of your divorce team. I help you understand and navigate the process, come to terms with your emotions, avoid costly mistakes, find your true voice, and create an empowered life post-divorce. If you're interested in learning more, schedule a free consultation at herempowereddivorce.com. And be sure to check out my other episodes of Her Empowered Divorce podcast and resources on my website or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. This will help me reach out to more women in the same space so you are not so alone. I appreciate your support. Until next time, take care and stay empowered.